hour on a Saturday afternoon to talk about change. My name's Cheryl Stevens. Cheryl Ann is the name that people use when I'm in trouble, and hopefully I won't get in too much trouble over the next hour, and that you'll enjoy learning during this next hour. I'm currently in far north New South Wales in a place called Goonoollabah. It's raining, and I found myself here after the COVID pandemic caused the Australian government to evacuate us from Timor-Leste in March 2020. So much of my story today and the examples I give will be set in East Timor, but understand that I'm currently working remotely with East Timor back in Australia. So this is me, although, as you can see, in the last couple of months, I've changed hairdressers. But yes, that blonde lady is me, and I'm with my Year 12 chemistry class in Dili, East Timor. To the core, I'm a biochemist, although I also have some background in geography. So I'm teaching, as I said, Year 12 chemistry here. And for the last, well, I've been teaching for 30 years, I'm afraid to say, and 29 of those have mostly been in middle or senior leadership positions. And it's through this that I've really become fascinated in how to implement change effectively and sustainably. Importantly, for those of you who are engaged in the MYP or perhaps are considering taking it on, I've done 10 to 15 years of MYP involvement, and many of those have been as an MYP coordinator. So in many ways, I have a fairly strong understanding and, to be honest, a passionate love of that program. So the Greek philosopher, the ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus, tells us that there is nothing permanent except change. I did a little research on Heraclitus, and I'm not quite certain, but I'm almost, I would suggest he may have done some time traveling and come to the Earth at the time of 2020, where in the last 12 months we've probably experienced more rapid change than at any time in my time of teaching. But it would be fair to say that in every year that I've been teaching, a change has been imposed upon me. And just when I thought that I became competent in an area, someone come along and said, well, I think we need to do it this way now. And that can be quite frustrating and quite exhausting. So again, my fascination is on how we might do this. There's no avoiding change in education, particularly of late. How might we do this in a sustainable manner and in a manner that has a low impact on the people that are being changed, that are undergoing the change. So I've given it some reflection, and I see change on a spectrum. On one end of the spectrum is mandated change. So this is change that you really have no say in what the change is and how you might implement the change. In general, this mandated change is often in response when a rapid response is required. So there could be no better example for that than the current situation with COVID, where social distancing had to be rapidly implemented. Many of us had to enter into online learning environments without any preparation. We were just told it had to happen, and this is how it would happen. On the other end of the spectrum is collaborative change. In this respect, you get choice on the type of change that you implement and how you implement it. So what the change is and how it would be implemented. In this process, you're able to have a more considered response, a more gradual response, and generally it will be a longer term change, not always, but a longer term change and much more sustainable. In my experience, this can happen in schools, collaborative change. PLCs or professional learning communities may generate this kind of change where they come up with recommendations after a year of studying an area. But for the most, the changes that I've experienced in schools, and I'm sure you will agree, are mandated changes where you're told from someone above, may it be the government or maybe your school executive, or it could be your MYP coordinator, or, and towards the end of 2021, as changes start with the MYP, it could be from the IBO, International Baccalaureate Organisation, that you have to make a change. And you as a coordinator or as a middle manager, or even in the classroom, have to work out how that change will be implemented. So you're given no choice on the change, but you're able to provide a considered response on how that change may be implemented. So today's presentation is focusing on this type of change, but I am sure that you could modify my model to suit mandated or collaborative change as well, although for mandated, very difficult to be collaborative. So the aim of this webinar today, what I want you to be able to, I want to be able to do for you, is to provide a change implementation framework that I've put together on the basis of lots of trial and error, and as I said, 2 or 3 stints at postgraduate studies. I also want to be able to show you how the theory, the actual model that I'm providing, works in practice, and I'm going to use the implementation of the IB MYP personal project as a model. And most importantly, I'm going to try and provide you with a little bit of time to consider how you might implement a change that you would like to bring about in your environment, in your school, or perhaps anywhere, but particularly in your school. So if you don't have a pen and paper, I know it's very old school, but that would be really useful to duck away and grab now, because there's going to be times when I'll stop the presentation and ask you to do some writing and some thinking. So that first bit of writing that I would really like you to do is to write down a change that you would like to implement. I'll give you about a minute. Okay, around about 10 seconds to go.
There's some folks who are even sharing it in the chat in case you
Oh,
want to hear
yes.
some.
Can you tell me some?
Yeah, I would love to. So
Yep.
Kiara has said, I'd like my school to become an eco school. So that's a change she wants to implement. Sarah
Great
says,
change, a big one.
a very big one, yeah. And a timely one at that. Sarah says, a teaching mindset for education in the 21st century. Felicity says the presence of subject coordinators is a change she wants. There's a point which says, and maybe I won't take names in case you guys want these changes to be personal to you, but there's one change is change in the mindset to adhere to syllabus rather than conceptual understanding. That's an interesting one. Inclusive education is real. That's a change that someone would like to bring about. I would like all assessments at my school to have more student agency. That's another one.
That's a lovely one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just so many more, which I think I can share with you later as well.
Thank you. That would be great. Thanks. Okay, so the example that I'm going to share with you is one that started for me in October of 2016, when I flew from Adelaide, Australia to Dili, East Timor, and to the international school there. It was October, so the beginning of term 4 when I had arrived. For those of you who are familiar with the MYP and the personal project, I arrived in term 4, and unfortunately, many of the project reports had not been finished, and the grades had not been submitted into the IBO. And to be honest, people were very frustrated with the process and very unhappy with the project. They saw it as additional work and really something that had to be done rather than something that is wonderful and wanted to be done. So I arrived and actually found out that I was going to be the personal project coordinator and the MYP coordinator. That was a bit of a surprise to me when I arrived. And so I set about initially establishing how we might do the personal project a little bit better in the next year. So that's the change that I wanted to implement to improve the personal project process at the school. So this is the model that I'm putting forward as an effective model for change in an education context. For those of you who are students of change, who have studied change theory in a postgraduate level, or perhaps not, even in the psychology level, an undergraduate psychology level, this is loosely based on Lewin's model of change, which is involves freezing, unfreezing, and then refreezing. That model of change I was never ever completely happy with, because I believe that change is a dynamic process, that it's a cyclic process. It's not a linear process. And so that was one of the first things that I wanted to include in my model, was the fact that it's cyclic and that it never stops. And the arrows are deliberately double-sided, because sometimes you'll move forward to one stage and then you'll have to come back again, and vice versa. And in fact, I wonder whether I should have cross arrows in the center, because sometimes you can go from preparation, evaluation back to collaboration, and so on. So this is the model. There are three stages: preparation, collaboration, and evaluation, and then three phases within that. I'm going to take you through each of those phases briefly tonight, and in doing that, it would be great for you to start to think about each of those phases as it applies for your change. I want to just point out here, in case I get a little carried away and I forget, sometimes I do those things, that I believe it is this stage here, the preparation stage, that is the most essential for the effective implementation of change. More often than not in schools, I see people coming in at this phase and trying to get a change implemented, and they come across a large number of blocks, and the change either is forced through with great stress to everyone, or it just doesn't succeed at all. And really, they just haven't done the work that's required beforehand, the preparatory work. So I encourage you, it's very easy to think, oh, that's not that important, but to actually spend a lot of time on this idea of preparing for your change before you actually start to actually implement it. So we'll start first off with the why. It is really essential that you understand why you are doing the change, and you need to be able to verbalize this. Now it sounds fairly straightforward, but sometimes we have these changes, but we just don't know why we're doing them, particularly in these circumstances where the change is being mandated on us. So for my team, when I arrived in Delhi, well, why do we have to do the personal project? Well, the first reason is because it's a mandated requirement. So that makes it fairly easy to make sure that it gets done, but it doesn't ensure that it's done with enthusiasm or great motivation. So many other reasons, and I could list about 20 more here, but these are the ones that just come straight off the top of my head that I was able to say to start. Well, look, powerful learning. It's incredibly powerful learning. It strengthens the relationship between the student and their parent or guardian. It increases community links. It is absolutely fantastic marketing for our school. It builds students' resilience, that at the beginning of the project and halfway through, they don't think they could do it. And then amazingly, at the end, they have this extraordinary project. And if it's managed properly, students absolutely love it. So now I ask you, you've written down your change. Start to think about why you want to make this change. What's driving that change? Again, I'd love to be able to give you half an hour and be able to workshop this, but we won't have a lot of time. So just jot down maybe 2 or 3 reasons why you think that this change is worthwhile, why you need this change.
And I guess for those of them willing to share on chat, happy to relay those to you, Cheryl.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so if you'd like to, you can put your inputs in the chat box as well. Great. So a few responses coming in, Cheryl. So I'm going to take the ones where you've also mentioned what change you're talking about, so it gives us some context. So an attendee says, with student agency for assessments, this was her
Yes.
change. The why is really, it's better for students and it's just good quality teaching and learning to lead with agency. So that's her why. For another attendee, the pandemic itself has been a challenge for everybody, and to see how things can change overnight. So learning and teaching has progressed dynamically. It'll be interesting to also see what your change was when you're talking about that. So for inclusive education, this was someone who said her change is to make sure that everybody understands inclusive education is important. And she says it's in order to maintain equity in education. And for someone who spoke about, I think, SDGs to make students more aware of the SDGs, lead by that. She says because global warming is the main issue and it's a way to make students think more about ecology and the UN goals. Oh, I think this is from someone who spoke about making school eco-friendly, Cheryl. So
Yes,
a
and
lot of
using
people who have put their whys in as well.
That was interesting. In Timor, there is a team of people working towards building an entire curriculum around the SDGs for the senior school. Yeah. Can I encourage you there with your whys to be as specific and detailed as possible? What do you mean by better? What does better mean? Because it will be more convincing in your mind. So you write that down first and then you continue to unpack it. What does better mean? What does equity, why is equity important? Those sorts of things are really important to unpack because it's like writing, if you're MYP experience, it's like writing your inquiry statement. The more you argue over it, the more you debate your inquiry statement, the greater depth you'll have of the understanding of that statement. And that's the same here. The deeper you dig as to your why, the stronger you will be in your conviction as to that why. So if we've done the why, if we go to the what, so what exactly do you want to change? And at this very early stage, it is incumbent on you to become the expert. It is really, really important that you gain as much information as possible about your change. Read whatever you can, research, go to in-services if your school can afford it. For me, the most effective learning I did was visit other schools in my area to learn how they did the personal project. And that was really, really powerful. Nowadays, social media and the IB has fantastic online communities, but there's other online communities related to your change. Certainly for the sustainable development goals there are, and I know for student agency also there's great online communities that you can become a member of so that you can become an expert. Obviously, if it's possible, and let's hope in many years it is, that you can go to conferences, that's a great way of sharing understanding. And if you can afford it, postgraduate study and podcasts, audiobooks. The important note I want to make here is, though, if you do not know the answer to something, it is really important that you don't make it up to save face, that you be very clear to your team. If you're asked a question and you don't know the answer, you say, I don't know the answer, but I will find out. Because at this stage, if you state that something should be done this way, and then all of a sudden you find out that it needs to change, that is not accurate, it will actually undermine your team's trust in you, and that will put your change in jeopardy. So it's really important that you're quite transparent. Do all you can to become the expert. And it's also possible here that if that's way beyond you, that you delegate to your team members later on in the communication phase to do this. But initially, you need to know what the change is. So have a quick think about how, in this current environment, how could you improve your expertise in the area of your change? In an environment where we're not able to actually travel to in-services and things along that way, there might be some alternative thinking here. I'm wondering if anyone can add more to my list.
Yeah. So we'll just give you a few seconds to pop it in there.
Yep.
There's someone in here, Cheryl, who's invited you to Delhi in case you ever travel to Delhi to visit the school and see how they go about all this. Great.
Yeah,
so the answers are coming. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lovely. Thank you for that invite. Let's hope we can travel very soon.
Hopefully. So there, a few answers are coming in. So Amal says inviting community members and experts to come in. Ira says improvise ways to make things clear to students through DIY activities from things that are in their homes. Be a part of learning communities on social media, online PD programs. And Carolina says, like you suggested, she would love to visit other schools and see how they do it. A lot of people who are saying, yes, the IB educator chat sessions as well are a great resource for sure, Barb. So a lot of people here, I think a combination of things, Cheryl, one being online communities, online PD courses, and a lot of other people who are saying, I want to visit schools, I want to bring the community into the classroom as well.
Yeah, certainly I have to say, the two most powerful learning experiences in terms of PD are visiting other schools and certainly the PD that's delivered by the IB is world class. Yeah. So let's talk about putting together the what and the why. So you know the what your change is, and you know the why, and now it's up to you to do what Michael Fullan says. I'm not sure if any of you have read Michael Fullan's book on leadership called Nuances, but it's a fabulous book. And he has these sticky phrases, not phases. I'm sure he has sticky phases sometimes, but sticky phrases. And that this phrase is essentially talk the walk. So the walk the talk is possibly familiar to you, and we'll get to that later, but he talks about you being able to talk the walk, to be able to talk the what and why. And the concept of the elevator spiel, I'm sorry if you already know this, but I'll just briefly explain it, is that if you were to enter an elevator and someone said to you, tell me about this change you want to implement, and you've got 5 floors, so around about a minute, perhaps, if you're lucky, to be able to tell them what it is and why you're doing it. So for me, the sphere that I would give for the personal project is an individual project, individual research project, where students research an area of interest and act on the basis of that research. It is, without doubt, the most powerful learning experience I have ever facilitated. So now over to you. Sorry, before you over to you, I just want to remind you, you must have multiple spiels, not just one. So I've written one there that I perhaps could use with parents and perhaps with the board of my school or the school owner, but I'm not sure that I would use it with students. So I encourage you, we'll probably just write one tonight, but you need to have multiple spiels suited for multiple stakeholders. So the way you would sell the personal project or your change to students may be very different to the way you would sell that change to a parent. And I would encourage you to have 3 or 4 spiels written that you can revert to. Obviously, I'm not suggesting you pull out your notes and read it to the parents. You need to be able to talk to these with conviction off the top of your head. So over to you. Create an elevator spiel and please share it with us for your change.
Elevator pitches always made me nervous, Cheryl. Let's see how the audience reacts to it.
Well, it would be extremely difficult in Timor because there is only one elevator and it only has 3 floors. And so it would be a very, very quick elevator spiel. But there's only one elevator in the whole country.
Cheryl, you also mentioned a book. Am I right? Can you perhaps say that again and I'll pop that into the chat?
Yeah, it's Michael Fullan's Nuances about leadership.
Okay.
I'll just check that I've got the name right. It could be just Nuanced Leadership.
Okay.
But it's
so we'll just look that up quickly and pop the link into the chat, guys.
Yeah,
Great.
it's Nuanced Leadership by Michael Fullan. Why some leaders succeed and others fail.
Great. We also have a few responses in Cheryl, so I'm going to take a few. So this comes from, I think, the attendee who wants to make assessments more student, bring in more student agency in their assessments. So she says, allowing students more choice and agency in their assessments allows them to engage fully and showcase their full learning in a way that suits them.
Yeah, that's great.
Emily, so I can repeat that.
Could you read that one again for me, please?
Allowing students more choice and agency in their assessments allows them to engage fully and showcase their full learning in a way that suits them. So I see both engaging as well as showcasing learning.
Yeah.
We have another one, which is around policies. So when policies are clear, informed by cutting edge research and published to everyone in the community, then teachers can proceed easily and effectively with excellent teaching in their classrooms. I think for the next rounds of sharing, if you can also just quickly pop in what your change was, that might be great in reminding us what change you picked. Yeah. So there are many more, Cheryl. So
yeah, that's great. And I think we'll talk a little later in the next bit about motivation theory, but I'll move on, and that will also help you creating your elevator skills.
Yeah.
So the final bit is the who, and I think this is the bit that people skip over the most in this preparation stage, but and I think it's integral. You need to understand your stakeholders. You need to know who they are. You need to know who amongst your stakeholders has the greatest influence or the greatest power. You need to identify who will be your change agents, and you also need to identify who will be your blockers. Again, one of Michael Fullan's phases is to use the group to change the group. Ultimately, all changes will be effective and sustainable if the group owns them. If your team does not own them, then it is highly unlikely that they will. I wanted to talk about the fact change agents and giving them roles is very easy to do. They're engaged in the change. They already believe in it. They want to do anything they can to make the change happen. On the opposite side of that are your blockers. These are people who, for a multitude of reasons, may not be comfortable with the change. It is really important that you engage these people. You actually sit down, you talk to them, and you find out what their concerns are, and you try to work with them and encourage and work beyond those concerns to calm those concerns. It's essential that those conversations happen as quickly as possible, because and I'll talk about this later as well, any negativity can spread very quickly. And in fact, you should embrace your blockers because they're really critical thinkers. They're the people who are most likely to spot where problems might come, and they will provide you with the opportunity to counteract those problems well before they're started. So again, I think Fullan's phrase here is fantastic. Use the group to change the group. It's not you pushing the group in one direction. It's actually encouraging everyone within the group to move forward. The other note I want to make here, and again, this just comes from years, unfortunately, making mistakes and not knowing this, is a position is not always reflective of power. So automatically we think that the most influential stakeholder is perhaps the principal. or perhaps a school owner or someone on your board or the school executive. And certainly those people have power. But so too does the lady or the man who's working in the canteen, who gets to speak to the children and the parents on a much more regular basis than you do. If they do not like your change, or if they're not aware of it, you can guarantee that they will make that change implementation, they could make that change implementation difficult. This also perhaps applies to your principal's personal assistant or secretary, who may not have the position of principal but has a great deal of influence, and also your administration officers in the front office or your receptionists. Don't be blinded by position is what I'm saying. And when you engage all stakeholders, make sure you consider how this affects the maintenance team. How does your change affect the people who work in the canteen? How does this change affect the cleaners? And they're really important things to consider. Just brainstorming those things and take them into consideration may allow you to have one small conversation that ensures that all your stakeholders are swimming in the same direction. This would be a lengthy process, so you can quickly jot this down, but try and list your stakeholders. I challenge you now to list ones out of the ordinary, ones that you think have more power and less position.
And in the meantime, a lot of appreciation coming in for this session and the topic that you've picked, Cheryl, given that these are, times of change across the globe. A lot of teachers really finding resonance in, I think, the overall topic as well as the points that you're providing. So thanks for that.
Thank you for that lovely feedback.
Great. So Rachel, I think is who had also spoken about student agency and assessment. So she says students and teachers.
I would say, Rachel, one of your possible blockers will be your parents, who I don't know your context, but I'm living from my context and my experience with parents who tend to want more traditional academic processes, and so they get frightened when we hand. You would have to work for that change. You would need to work very hard with your parents. And in fact, the MYP assessments, I don't know if anyone else has experienced this, but convincing parents that grading beyond A, B, C, D, E, F is effective is a huge battle.
Yeah. I'm going to take one more example. So Felicity had told us about the coordinator. The change she wanted to think about was, I think, the coordinator requirement of visiting schools, guidance, trainings, things like that. I'm just going to quickly check in on whether there's more from Felicity, but the people that she's identified for this is teachers, students, and parents. A lot of people identifying the similar pool of folks, no matter what their initial challenge was. I like that Abina has basically broken it down and said the hardest working and most respected teachers can sometimes be the biggest blockers. So that might be something within the way that they're looking at staff as well, creating these demarcations.
Who was that said that, Chandra?
Abina.
Yeah, and Abina, that's a very good point. People that have been in a school for a long time and have a lot of respect are people that you want to get on side very early when you're trying to implement a change, because they may not be in the position of an MYP coordinator or anything like that, but they have great influence over staff.
Yeah,
it's a very good point.
Yeah. So so exactly that. A lot of folks were essentially focusing on these key stakeholders who impact learning and teaching: teachers, parents, as well as students themselves.
Okay. Yeah, that's excellent. Yeah, and I really do encourage you. I've seen changes fail because the right stakeholders, who may not be the obvious people of power, are not involved in the process, and that's really essential. I think while we're talking about stakeholders, I think we can't go past this wonderful self-determination theory So when you're trying to get people on side for your change, to influence their thinking and have them feedback to you of their concerns, you need to consider that these three facets are important to people. The first one is autonomy. Autonomy is essentially, do I have control, any control over this situation? If people feel like they have loss of control, and we've really seen this recently with COVID, over a situation, the change is likely to not succeed. They want to feel like they have some control. Competence, we all want to feel good at what we do. So I think this area is perhaps the one that where people put up a block because they're not confident that they feel like that they're able to cope with the change. And finally, relatedness. They want to feel like that they're implementing this change along with others, that they're not out there on their own and not a maverick. There are other people doing it and you're working as a team. So I think that's really important when you're working with your team to implement the change. Every one of those people wants to feel like they're in control, that they're competent, and that they're connected to other people in the team to get the job done. So that's the first prep stage, the preparation stage. And as I said, it's broken up into the why, what, who. If I can use a farming analogy, this is the stage where you're ploughing and fertilizing the field before you sow the seeds. And it is an essential stage, and I believe it is a stage that is often overlooked or undercut because we're in a rush to get to the change straight away. So Shadra, is there if people could ask, maybe we can ask 2 or 3 questions?
There's one quick question from Sandhya who just wants you to maybe quickly recapture what you said about your idea of competence and stakeholder motivation.
This here?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so autonomy. So this is Deci and Ryan's theory on what motivates people. And people will lose motivation if they do not feel in control of the situation. People will lose motivation if they don't feel like they're competent, that they can actually do the change. So I might give an example here with the MYP. So for example, with the personal project. So autonomy means, for example, that they're able to get some input on how it's going to happen. So they do feel like there's some control. Competence will mean, I'm going through this bit in a moment, but competence would mean that you deliver PD to ensure that they're skilled and you provide time to allow that to happen. And relatedness is just basically ensuring that your group meets as a team and talks it through so that there's a sense of connection. If one of those declines, and people start to feel like they're losing control, or I can't do this, or I'm the only one doing all the work for this change, the change is not going to succeed. It is pretty straightforward. Yeah. Does that help?
Definitely. And I think there are a few more questions, but I might hold them till the end because we have about 15 minutes to go.
Okay, I need to talk very quickly. Okay, so I am going to talk quickly and perhaps not give as much time for writing now, if you don't mind. So the second stage is collaboration, and that's where communication is really important. And in the communication, so you come together as a team, and initially, I'm using Erica McWilliams' faces here, but you are the sage on the stage. You inform stakeholders of the what and the why. You tell them everything you know. It's really important here that you release information gradually. You don't come in with your meetings with multiple resources, put them on the table and say, here, these are all for you, read them and get informed. That, again, will affect people's competence, and you don't want that to happen. And they will feel overburdened and most likely just throw their hands in the air and say, this is all too difficult. We're not going to this. I'm not going to engage here. So stagger your information delivery. And then finally, you move from being the expert, the sage on the stage, to the meddler in the middle, because this is where you're trying to work out how stakeholders think the change should be implemented. And that means you spend a lot less time talking and a lot more time questioning and listening to what people's suggestions are. And then you as a group come to a consensus in the create stage, which we'll get to in a moment. In the communication phase, I would suggest, in order to create a culture of trust, that you sit down with your team, if you haven't done this, many schools have this already, and create essential agreements on how your meetings will run. That means they start at this time, they finish at this time, that you will not be on your devices finishing your reports or answering your emails, that you will commit completely to the meeting. And many other agreements that you might have. It might be that we'll always have cheese and biscuits at our meeting or something along that line. And I encourage you to make it as easy as possible for your team or your staff, because realistically, teachers want to teach. They want to go into the classroom. They want to do the very best job they can. And you're now asking them to do a little bit more on top of this. And so you need to make it as easy as possible so that they are able to continue teaching and at the same time help with the implementation change. At this point, you're creating what is called a unity of purpose. So for the personal project, in terms of distributing information, we did it to staff, we did it with normal staff meetings. In students, we did it in pastoral care meetings. For students and parents, we did it in an induction night. This was a new thing that we tried. We brought in staff and the parents and students together, and they started working on the project, formulating their question that night together. And of course, for the community, we used the newsletter and social media. There was 1,000 questions, to be honest, that needed to be answered about the way we were going to improve the rollout of the personal project. We had questions about the report, the exhibition, how we structured the year, how did we market it. It was a great meeting when we generated all of these different questions. I'm going to, because I have so little time, you'll have to come back to this report and take the time to input some of the questions that you might like to ask, sorry. So that's the communicate, which was in 2 stages, where you go in as the expert and then move from being the expert and talking to being the questioner and asking how. The second stage of the collaboration is capacity build. You need to make people feel competent, if we go back to that original model. And in doing that, you might use external professional development or internal. As I've said before, focus on your change agents and engage your blockers. Do not think because they don't want to do it that they should be restricted from accessing professional development. It could be that very professional development that changes them from a blocker to a change agent. In change theory, we call this building professional capital. My personal experience is that internal professional development is the most effective. You will more than likely find someone within your team that's able to help out with PD. So for example, with the personal project, you can utilise your English teachers to assist staff in the report writing process of the personal project. But look within first is my strongest. And those people who do go out to external professional development, encourage them to return to the school and give PD on that actual professional development that they've done. Again, because we're short on time, I apologise, we won't be able to do this. Realistically, we could do this over a day and it'd be a wonderful workshop, but we've just got a short amount of time. But normally now you would sit down and think about where you might, particularly in this current environment, build professional development capital. So the final stage of this collaboration phase is create. And that's where you actually use the questions that you generated to create a series of short-term plans to implement your change. And again, I remind you, when you're planning, buffer the group, that is, or buffer your team. And what I mean by that is, remember, they are teachers, they are in the classroom teaching. That is their priority. Your priority may be this change because that's your role in leadership. But for them, what they're thinking about is, what am I going to teach in the lesson tomorrow morning? So you need to make sure that you set things up so they're as easy as possible and as pleasant as possible to do. And if when you create this strategic vision, and things don't go quite to plan, don't become defensive. Just go back to your group. Go back to your team and say, well, you know what? This is what we planned should happen. It didn't happen. And let's talk about why it didn't happen and what we can do instead. I think it's really important that if you're leading the change, that you're open to the fact that things will go wrong and that you don't take it personally, don't be defensive, and return to your group for possible solutions. So this is what we did with the personal project. And again, some of you, if you're MYP practitioners, this would not be too unfamiliar to you. We structured the project over term 4, 1 year into term 3 the next year. And I know, having just read the changes that are coming with the project, is now going into 3 phases. So all of you are going to, if you're an MYP coordinator or personal project coordinator, are going to have to think about how you might structure the project with the new changes that are coming in September 2021. In terms of staff supervision, we grappled with this for some time as a team, but we did decide to allow supervisors to select the project and the student that they would go through on the on the basis of we know that good student-teacher relationships lead to better learning outcomes, and that certainly was the case. So that is the second phase, and as Shadra said, we've a bit short of time, so we will ask for questions on that phase towards the end, and I apologise for rushing you through. And I will give out my email later so that if anyone wants to write and ask some questions and discuss it, I'm more than happy to as well. So the final phase is the evaluation phase, and the first bit of it is the fun bit. And this is actually where you rejoice. You must celebrate your successes. It's essential to celebrate successes, small successes, large successes. Here's the MYP team at the end of 2017, celebrating a successful year, of which was a really fantastic personal project exhibition. And of course, in my case, the change that I'm having, the personal project exhibition itself is something to rejoice. It's an absolute celebration. Students are so proud, parents are so proud, and it really is indicative of the powerful learning that is occurring in the school. It is really easy, because we are so busy in schools, not to forget to stop and celebrate. But you need to actually celebrate all successes that you have. Let there be small or large. You have to make time for that. And it doesn't have to be expensive, but it certainly does need to be lots of fun. The next stage is to review. And again, short of time, and to be honest, I did some postgraduate study at Melbourne Uni on this, on evaluation, and you can spend an entire year learning how to evaluate. What is essential is that you have, just as you celebrate everything, you should evaluate everything. And I think there are 4 key points to evaluation. That you must include all your stakeholders. You need to ask them, what did we do well? What could we do better? Now, how you do this will depend on who you are asking, which group of stakeholders you're asking, but you should use multiple evaluation tools. Those of you who are into data, you really should be looking to triangulate to give you some valid results. But by using different tools with the same group of stakeholders, you'll tend to overcome any biases. You need to be transparent. If things are fed back and they're negative, you need to be discussing that with your team. And in particular, if it is really obvious that someone is quite upset by something, then you need to address that quickly, because the negativity will spread. And that can be as simple as sitting down, and should be as simple as having a conversation with those people and establishing and clarifying what it might be, because more often than not, much negativity is about miscommunication and misperception. And a good conversation can often rectify that very quickly. So for the personal project, with our staff, we used a staff meeting for a SWOT analysis, and I met with each staff on a fortnightly basis as a normal process, and we talked about what worked and what didn't. For the students, we actually used an anonymous survey and parents, and I also met with some small focus groups. We were fortunate enough, although it was a very difficult year for me because it was my first year there, to have an IB evaluation that year. And so that also allowed us to do have a review process. And of course, the grades came back in. So some of the feedback, there was a lot, but it was students and parents thought it was hard work, but worthwhile. They really enjoyed the opportunity to work with their children, parents did. Everyone enjoyed the exhibition, but really importantly, it was very clear by the end of 2017 that our EFL students, English as foreign language students, really struggled with the report writing process. We were lucky enough to get a commendation for the way we ran the personal project in 2017 in our evaluation, but our grades for our reports were very poor, and so we knew we needed to lift our game there. And we also knew that it was essential for the grade 9 students to attend we needed to make it compulsory for them to attend the grade 10 exhibition. So from your review process and obviously discussion, you then come up with recommendations. What do we aim to do better next time? Again, I come back to the group. By implementing a change using your team and using the group, they give ownership. You're more likely to have the change be successful. But essentially, I think it's about the answer lies within the group. You are all your team will be all very experienced, had wide, varied educational backgrounds. The solution to any problem generally lies within the group in your school. We often spend hours looking elsewhere for it, but it's always within the school, and it's the best solution because they understand the context. In some point here, you go back to that collaboration stage where you're communicating, you're saying, okay, this is the problem, how do we fix it? And once you've come up with a series of recommendations, it is essential you feed back to stakeholders, because the next time you ask them to do a review, they'll say, well, what is the point? Why do we do this? You know, we fill in these surveys and nothing happens as a result of this. I'm sure you've heard that in schools before. So it is really important that you take the time to feed back to the stakeholders what the recommendations are, what you found out, and as a result, what you recommended. So for us in the personal project at Dili, we knew that the parent-student induction night was a huge success and that we would continue doing so, and it continues to this day. One of the big changes is that my position and doing the personal project coordinator was just too time-consuming, so we needed to appoint a personal project coordinator. Well, we created scaffolds for students to write their reports, and we ensured they were on Google Docs so that supervisors could check. Insisted the grade 9s had to attend. We looked at the possibility of taking our exhibition off campus for better marketing. We wanted students to dress more formally on the exhibition night, and we also asked our students to assist the PYP with their exhibition night set up. And I think perhaps the most significant goal for us was that we didn't want to waste the work done in the projects. What we realised is that students invested an enormous amount of time in these projects. They come out with fantastic products, and then they just sat on the shelf and no one used them. And you know, that in itself invalidated the worthiness in committing to the project. Oh yeah, I did all this work, but nothing, and I made this great product, but nothing came of it. So we knew to ensure that this was well implemented and well celebrated, that we needed to do something with the projects at the end of the year beyond the exhibition. And so we did. And this is us in 2019. Beautiful Miss Selma in the centre as the new personal project coordinator, and our students formally dressed in the traditional dress of Timor the Thais, and our boys even popped on a tie, which is quite impressive. And very briefly, I think the thing that we're most proud about with our project was that our students took their products out into the community. And so here we have Sabina, who created an app an educational app in the lingua franca of Timor-Leste, Tetum, and that app was purchased by the Ministry of Education and used during the online learning. And on the right, Milena, whose head you may not be able to see, she created a booklet to be distributed throughout Timor on psychomotor skill goals for toddlers, and so that parents would know if there was a problem with their child's motor skills and be able to get intervention very quickly. She then workshopped this with 3 of her friends and took it to the UNICEF's Generation Unlimited project or competition, and they are now on the world stage. They won the Timor-Leste stage, they've won the regional stage, and they're now competing on the world stage. And this is all from a recommendation that came from the group about making sure our projects didn't just sit on a shelf and get wasted. So that is the evaluation stage, and that really winds up the whole process in terms of the change cycle. If I might just go back to the cycle. So we've gone through the preparation, collaboration, and evaluation phase. I think if you sit down and use this model to structure and think about how you may implement your change, and spend more time thinking about the implementation of your change as opposed to what the change will be, I think you will find that your change will be highly successful. I thank you very much for listening. I'm sorry that the last bit was so rushed. And a huge shout out to my Lee International school community who are dealing with an enormous amount of change at the moment.
Cheryl, thanks so much for walking us through that. I've also told everybody on the chat that I'll be sharing this chat with you just so you can see the amount of appreciation that I think this whole, just you breaking down the process in such a detailed way has received from everyone. Thanks so much, Cheryl, for sharing your process and for also sharing all these examples that I think have made it really concrete for folks to take away and put their own change questions into. Guys, as I said, the recording for the session will be available. So for all of you who want the slides, you are going to have this information available with you. And Cheryl, if you can go to the last slide, I think we've also...
oh, yeah.
Yeah, I guess we haven't put your email ID down there, but if you want to share it with folks, just in case they want to, you can pop that into the chat box or say it out loud too. I can pop that in too. Perfect.
Yeah.
So, make sure to keep in touch, and we'd love to sort of see whatever you've learned being shared on social media as well. Thanks, Cheryl. So Cheryl shared her ID. I'm just going to share that with you again. And excellent. Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Cheryl, thank you so much again for walking us through this.
Thank you for being such a great mediator.
No, thanks for walking us through this very personal, journey of change, and also constructing it into a framework that everybody can use. And for all of you, thanks a lot for being a positive community on the chat. And our next session, which is actually a walkthrough of the MYP platform, has begun. So if you'd like to join that, please hop on over right away using the link on the schedule. And thanks again to Cheryl for making the time for this.
Obrigada. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. See you at the next session, everyone. Please join. Thank you. Bye-bye.